නැවුම් සුවඳින් පිරේ නව රින් වෙළඳපොලේ අඩුම මිලකට
සුවඳවත් තේරීමක් ස්මාර්ට් ඉතිරියක්.
Tonight, full house. With 9 more cabinet ministers taking oaths today, Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe's new government causes political ripples. Good signs. Sri Lanka gets a show of moral support from G7 countries as a boost for its IMF talks. Downhill. Fitch downgrades Sri Lanka's long-term foreign currency rating to restricted default after missing Wednesday's payout. Soul searching. Former Finance Minister Ali Sabri makes an impassioned plea for unity or risk generations of debt. All this and much more coming up tonight on First at 9, this Friday, the 20th of May, 2022.
Nelly, මතකෙන් ගිලිහුණු black shine කෙස් කලඹක රහස sunset black shine සමගින්.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening. This is your English news service on AdaDerana 24. 9 more cabinet ministers took oaths before President Gotabaya Rajapaksa today, including 2 Samagi Jana Balawegaya MPs Harin Fernando and Manusha Nanayakara joining the government. Political sources, however, say that more ministers are expected to be appointed on Monday. However, the response from the Samagi Jana Balawegaya has been to suspend the memberships of Harin Fernando and Manusha Nanayakara, with disciplinary action also lined up. The Sri Lanka Freedom Party, in the meantime, has not taken it lightly that senior SLFP MP Nimal Sidipala de Silva also accepted a portfolio against their party decision.
Last week, 4 cabinet ministers were sworn in before President Gotabaya Rajapaksa in order to maintain the country's essential services until more members are appointed to the cabinet. The appointed ministers were Professor G.L. Pieris to the portfolio of Foreign Affairs, Dinesh Gunawardena for Public Administration, Home Affairs, Provincial Councils and Local Government, Prasanna Ranatunga for Urban Development and Housing, and Kanchana Wijayasekara for Power and Energy. With that today, 8 more members were sworn today, with 2 of them from the country's main opposition, Samagi Jana Balawegaya. SLPP parliamentarian Nimal Sidipala de Silva was sworn in as the Minister of Ports, Shipping and Aviation. Dr. Susil Premajayantha took oaths as the Minister of Education, while Kehili Rambukwella was appointed as Minister of Health. The Cabinet portfolio of Justice, Prison Affairs and Constitutional Reforms was given to Dr. Vijayadasa Rajapaksa. Harin Fernando was appointed the Minister of Tourism and Lands, while Manusha Nanayakara was placed in charge of the Ministry of Labour and Foreign Employment. Further, Dr. Ramesh Patirana remained in his position as the Minister of Plantation Industries. In addition, Parliamentarian Nalin Fernando was given the cabinet portfolio of Trade, Commerce and Food Security. Tiran Alas meanwhile took oath before the President as the Minister of Public Security. Following their appointments, Minister Harin Fernando assumed duties at the Ministry of Tourism today. Speaking at a media briefing, Fernando expressed his views on the country's current situation.
What the Honourable Prime Minister believes by next month the funds will start coming in, but they wanted to have a short-term measure for the next 1 month, and they are convinced, and even the Minister of Power and Energy Kanjana also told me today he is certain that the queues will start disappearing in the next 3 days. RW was firm that the funding will come and the technical assistance from various countries will start to happen. IMF is positive. World Bank already has given something, but we are in a huge crisis. We are on a political suicide mission.
Further, Fernando also commented on the government's readiness to engage with protesters at Golf Face Green.
There are modern younger generation who's there who'll understand the situation. So we are hoping to meet them with RW on Monday, bringing all to one table and discuss and calling it a truce and trying to find and buy some time with some timeline. So I believe Go Home can stay there, but the protesters should come and engage with us so that they are also involved. And also one positive thing that Ranil Wickremesinghe is trying to do, he's going to have parliament committees, oversight committees. He's putting 2 or 3 members from the protesters to be in those committees. So we are building a new culture of politics. So it's good for them to be on those oversight committees.
In the meantime, Minister of Justice, Prison Affairs and Constitutional Reforms, Dr. Vijayadasa Rajapaksa also assumed duties this afternoon.
19වෙනි ආණ්ඩු ක්‍රම ව්‍යවස්ථාවෙන් අපි ඇති කරපු ප්‍රශස්ත ප්‍රජාතන්ත්‍රවාදී ක්‍රමවේදය 20 වෙනි ආණ්ඩු ක්‍රම ව්‍යවස්ථා සංශෝධනය මගින් යටපත් කරපු නිසා අපිට සිද්ධ වෙනවා 21 වෙනි සංශෝධනය ගෙනවිත් නැවතත් 19 ආණ්ඩු ක්‍රම ව්‍යවස්ථා සංශෝධන ආකෘතියේ අලුත් සංශෝධනයක් කරන්න. ඒ සඳහා මේ වන විට අපි අවශ්‍ය කෙටුම්පත් සම්පාදනය කරලා අවසන් කරලා තියෙන්නේ. ඊළඟ සතියේ අමාත්‍ය මණ්ඩලයට ඉදිරිපත් කරලා හැකිතාක් ඉක්මනට අපි පාර්ලිමේන්තුවෙන් සම්මත කරගන්න කටයුතු කරනවා.
Further, Ministers Dr. Susil Premajayantha and Nalin Fernando also assumed duties at their respective ministries today as well. However, some parties in the opposition have not taken the acceptance of portfolios by their members well. Following the appointment of Nimal Siripala de Silva as the Minister of Ports, Shipping and Aviation, the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, who earlier stated that they will support the formation of all-party government, now says that accepting ministerial portfolios in the incumbent government is against the policies of the party.
අපි ඇමතිකම් ගැනීම පිළිබඳව තීරණයක් ගත්තේ නැහැ. පක්ෂයේ මධ්‍යම කාර්ය සභාව තීන්දුව කළේ රජයට අපි අවශ්‍ය සහයෝගය දෙමු පාර්ලිමේන්තුවේදී ඡන්ද දෙන්න ඕන නම් ඒ ඡන්ද පාවිච්චි කරමු. නමුත් අමාත්‍ය ධූර තනතුරු ගැනීම අවශ්‍ය නැහැයි කියන එකයි.
Further, the main opposition Samagi Jana Balawege has suspended the party membership of ministers Harin Fernando and Manusha Nanayakkara over their acceptance of ministerial portfolios. The party's General Secretary Ranjit Madumbandara said that disciplinary action will be taken against the 2 parliamentarians as well.
Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe says that a food crisis is imminent in Sri Lanka by August, given the current status quo with no dollars and no signs yet of the situation improving anytime soon. Speaking to Sky News while acknowledging of the anguish of the protesters across the country, the Premier said that he expects donor nations to come through during Sri Lanka's crisis, as India has done throughout.
An increasing shortage and spiralling prices of many essential goods has forced many members of the public to take to the streets. In this backdrop, speaking to Sky News, Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe says that while he understands the anguish of the protesters, those who were gathered at the World Trade Center yesterday were what he termed a group of militant youth who wanted water cannons and tear gas fired at them. Given the shortage of essentials and the lack of dollars to source the necessities, Prime Minister Wickremesinghe warned that the country could face a serious hunger crisis in 2 months.
Our main concern is that we have not had fertilizer for cultivation. The rice cultivation season will not have the full production. Therefore, from about August onwards, there's a possibility of a food crisis in Sri Lanka. That's about the time that the global food crisis will also take place. And we have to see how we survive till about March next year.
However, the Premier added that he believed that friendly donor nations would come through in helping Sri Lanka through its tough times, just as India has.
Well, we were in default anyway and we didn't have the money to pay. We have to acknowledge that. I feel ashamed about it, but nevertheless, this is reality. We've been engaging our partners and they've responded well. We've been engaging with the IMF, but as you know, it takes time. India has been the quickest to respond. We've had money from them, which has enabled us to carry on. But we think in the next few months, there will be responses by the other donors.
Sri Lanka wouldn't be in this situation if it had the sufficient dollars to make the essential purchases. Even though one of the avenues of foreign exchange has been tourism, the country's status quo makes anyone planning a holiday second-guess any plans for travel to Sri Lanka. However, while acknowledging this reality, Premier Wickremesinghe nevertheless sought to encourage tourists to visit the country nonetheless.
Those who want to have an exciting time could come here and maybe they could even take part in the demonstrations. They could hold placards which says for the President of Sri Lanka to go home, or you could hold a placard asking the Prime Minister of your country to go home. All that is option that's available. We are not discouraging people from visiting, but we understand with the shortage of foreign exchange and some of the demonstration that is going on and the shortage of essentials that they may not visit Sri Lanka at this time.
In addition, the PM also told the news outlet that the current regime was to blame for the situation and that while the president's resignation is controversial, the answer he believed lied in the implementation of the 21st Amendment.
The last administration is to blame. They've run down the economy. We've come to a point where we are bankrupt, which has never happened to Sri Lanka before. We have no dollars, we have no rupees. People at Galface, all the youths, of the view that president should resign. That's a view also held outside and by some of the political parties. I have suggested that once we pass the 21st Amendment, which should restore the original 19th Amendment, strengthening Parliament, strengthening the powers of the Prime Minister, then all party leaders and the president should have a discussion and come to some arrangement on the future course.
Sri Lanka's long-term foreign currency issuer default rating has received restricted default downgrade from Fitch Ratings today after the island missed a key $78 million bond coupon payment on Wednesday. This is the first time that Sri Lanka has ever defaulted in its history.
Fitch Ratings has downgraded long-term foreign currency issuer default rating to restricted default after the country missed its first ever bond coupon payment on Wednesday. This is the first time in Sri Lanka's history that it has defaulted and has also made it the first country in Asia Pacific to do so as well. Following this, Fitch also downgraded Sri Lanka's dollar bonds to default as well, given the default on the senior unsecured foreign currency bonds and the cross-default clauses triggered in the other rated international foreign currency sovereign bonds. The bond payments, which were due on the 18th of April, were worth $78 million and had a 38-day grace period that expired on Wednesday. Sri Lanka has already suspended repayments for international sovereign bonds, commercial bank loans, Exim Bank loans and bilateral loans. However, multilateral lenders and senior creditors were excluded. Speaking yesterday, Central Bank Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe confirmed that the island has entered a preemptive default, adding that the island has announced that it was not going to pay. This, he said, could be termed a hard default based on the agreements. Early in April, when the suspension of debt payments was announced, Veerasinghe stated that Sri Lanka could not be able to pay until its portfolio of unsustainable debt would not be paid until a restructuring process was initiated. At present, Sri Lanka is in discussions with the International Monetary Fund and is awaiting the next meeting of the newly appointed Cabinet of Ministers to finalize the appointment of financial and legal advisors to begin restructuring talks.
The International Monetary Fund, which is currently in technical talks with Sri Lanka on an assistance program, says its technical talks with the government of Sri Lanka will conclude on the 24th of this month. IMF spokesperson Jerry Rice said that they will be monitoring the political and economic developments in Sri Lanka and will remain committed to support the country. In the meantime, G7 nations have also expressed their support to provide debt relief to the island nation.
Sri Lanka is currently facing its biggest economic crisis since gaining independence in 1948. However, towards finding some sort of relief from the crippling shortages currently, the government finally began negotiations with the International Monetary Fund in April for a staff-level program to help it ease its burdens. The government expectation is to get at least $3 to $4 billion from the fund's rapid financing facility. Even amidst the eruption of social tensions and unrest last week, the IMF still maintains that technical-level discussions between its officials and Sri Lankan authorities will continue in order to lay the groundwork for talks once a new government is formed. Yesterday, the IMF reiterated its commitment to help Sri Lanka to overcome the economic crisis.
We are concerned, of course, about the current economic crisis in Sri Lanka and especially the hardships being endured by the people of Sri Lanka, and especially many of those people poor and vulnerable. So we are clearly monitoring the political and economic developments very closely. An IMF team has been engaging in technical discussions on the authorities' request for an IMF-supported program, so they have asked. And there's currently a virtual IMF staff mission engaged in those technical talks with the Sri Lankan authorities, and we expect that mission to continue through May 24. So we remain committed to help Sri Lanka in line with the IMF's policies and will engage with stakeholders in support of a timely resolution of the crisis that is being faced there.
In the meantime, finance chiefs of G7 nations who met in Germany yesterday said that they support efforts to provide debt relief to Sri Lanka. In a statement, they said that they are committed to find long-term solutions for the Indian Ocean nation and urged it to negotiate constructively with the IMF on a potential loan program. They also said they stand ready to support the Paris Club efforts, which represents major creditor countries whose role is to find coordinated and sustainable solutions to payment difficulties experienced by debtor countries in line with its principles to address the need for a debt treatment for Sri Lanka. The G7 also called on other big creditor nations not in the Paris Club to coordinate with the group and urged them to provide debt relief on comparable terms. In response to the G7 statement, Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe in a tweet welcomed their announcement. Wickremesinghe added that continued engagement by the international community with Sri Lanka is key to overcoming the economic crisis.
The Reserve Bank of India yesterday decided to allow the settlement of trade transactions in Indian rupees outside the Asian Clearance Union as a measure to help its exporters through their difficulties in getting payments from crisis-hit Sri Lanka. Now, in March, the Indian government guaranteed a term loan of $1 billion from the State Bank of India to Sri Lanka for financing purchase of essential goods from India. In a circular, the RBI said that in view of the difficulties being experienced by exporters in receiving export proceeds from Sri Lanka and SBI's credit facility, it has been decided that such trade transactions with Sri Lanka falling under the arrangement may be settled in Indian rupees outside the ACU mechanism. Under the arrangement, financing of exports of eligible goods and services from India will be allowed subject to conditions and whose purchase may be agreed to by financed or be financed by SBI under the agreement. The Japanese government has stepped in to improve nutrition in urban and rural communities in Sri Lanka with a donation of $1.5 million through the United Nations World Food Programme. The Japanese embassy in Sri Lanka explained that the emergency assistance provided 3 months essential food supplies, including fortified rice, dal and oil for 15,000 urban and rural people and 380,000 school children.
The government of Japan has provided a sum of $1.5 million to Sri Lanka to help it through its economic crisis. The funds are to be allocated for the provision of food assistance that will be distributed through the United Nations World Food Programme. Interim Charge d'Affaires of the Japanese embassy in Sri Lanka, Katsuki Kotaro, explained that the emergency assistance will consist of 3 months essential food supplies, including fortified rice, dal and oil, approximately 15,000 urban and rural people, and 380,000 school children across the island. Kitaro added that the Japanese government hopes that the humanitarian assistance will help improve food access and nutrition for the people of Sri Lanka amidst the economic crisis. The World Food Programme is expected to use the funds to procure rice for the National School Meal Programme to ensure children can continue receiving a sufficient portion of their daily energy and nutrition requirement through the free school meals. Further, it will also enable the WFP to distribute ration packs comprising essential commodities to vulnerable households. Commenting on the donation, World Food Programme representative and country director in Sri Lanka, Abdul Rahim Siddiqui, explained that getting the right nutrition to those who need it the most will go a long way to mitigate the long-term effects to the country's economic downturn.
Coming up after this break, we have former Minister Ali Sabri's impassioned plea in Parliament.
Big 3.
Welcome back to the news. Former Justice and Finance Minister Ali Sabri today called for some serious soul-searching in Sri Lankan society, where he said that the responsibility for Sri Lanka's ills lies not only with its politicians, but with citizens who have not done their part. Calling for political unity before it's too late, the MP pledged to never set foot in Parliament again, explaining that he was both disgusted and disappointed in Sri Lanka's political culture.
Politicians la vitara passen pannannata epa anit agenuත් අහන්න tamun tax ගෙවනවද income tax එකේ ඉන්න අයගෙන් අහන්න ඔබ tax ටික අය කර ගන්නවද excise department එකෙන් අහන්න ඔබේ රස්සාව කරලා ඔබ රටට ගෙවිය යුතු ඒ මුදල් ප්‍රමාණය අය කර ගන්නවද custom එකෙන් අහන්න ඔබගේ මුදල් සඳහා ඔබ වග කියනවද දේශපාලඥයෝ විතරද පාරදෘශ්‍යතාවයට මුහුණ දෙන්නට ඕන අපේ සම්පූර්ණ ආදායම ට්‍රිලියන 1.4යි වියදම 3.4යි මෙන්න ප්‍රශ්නේ බරපතලකම සීන මාලිගාවල ඉඳලා පාරවල් වල උද්ඝෝෂණ කරා විතරක් කියලා මේ ප්‍රශ්න වලට උත්තර දෙන්නේ නැහැ ඒ ඉන්න මම නම් මේ පාර්ලිමේන්තුවේ පැත්ත පළාතවත් බලන්නේ නැහැ මට මේක ඕනෙත් නැහැ අපි ආවේ මේව බලන්න නෙවෙයි නමුත් කවුරු හරි අනාගතයේ දවසක මේ රට ගැන හිතලා තමන්ගේ ටැක්ස් ගෙවපු තමන් වෙනුවෙන් වැඩ කරපු රටට ආදරය කරන මිනිස්සුන්ට මේකට එන්න අවශ්‍ය පාර සලසලා දෙන්න අපි නම් එන්නේ නැහැ මේ පැත්ත පළාතවත් ඊට පස්සේ මට හිතා ගන්නට බෑ මගේ ශේෂ්ත්‍රයේ ඉන්න සමහර නීතිඥවරු අර අලි සබ්බි මහත්මයාගේ ගේ ගිනි ගන්නකොට ඒක ෂෙයා කරගෙන මේ රටේ බුදුහාමුදුරුවෝ පයතේපු රටේ ශාන්තිය සමාදානය කියන රටේ කොහොමද සන්තෝෂ වෙන්නේ මොනතරම් තිරිසන් සමාජයකට අපි ඉන්නේ මේ ඒ තිරිසන් සමාජයෙන් අපි ඉස්සරහට යන්න පුළුවන්ද මේ රටේ හැම මිනිස්සුම වගේ කියන්නට ඕන තමන්ගේ රස්සාව කරනවද තමන් ගන්න පඩියට යුතුයකමක් ඉෂ්ට කරනවද කොහෙටද අපි මේ රට අරගෙන යන්නේ කරු කතානායකතුමනි පරම්පරා ගානකටවත් අපිට මේ තියෙන ණය ටික ගෙවා ගන්න බැරි වෙයි අපි වහන්සි වෙලා වැඩ කරේ නැත්තම් මේ බොරුව නවත්තන්නට ඕන හැමෝම එහෙම හිතන දවසකට පුළුවන් මේ රට ගොඩ දාන්න අපි දිගින් දිගටම කරේ හැමදාම බැලුවේ ආණ්ඩුව පන්නලා අලුතින් ආණ්ඩු හදනවා මිසක ආණ්ඩු කරන එක ගැන පිළිවඳ නෙවෙයි ඒක තමයි ඇත්ත අපේ ආණ්ඩුවත් ඒ වරදේ ආකාරයටම කරා අපිටත් හිතා ගන්නට බෑ ඇයි මේ ආර්ථිකය කියවගත්තේ නැත්තේ කියන එක පිට ඒක තමයි ඇත්ත අපිත් ස්ටඩි කරනකොට කාලේ පරාදයි ඒ ප්‍රමාණයට අපි සමාවිල්ලන්නට ඕන මේ ආර්ථිකය කියවගත්තේ නැහැ හැබැයි අපි විතරක් නෙවෙයි හැමෝම කියවගත්තේ නැහැ IMF එකට වෙලාවට නොගිය එක ටැක්ස් ටික අඩු කරපු එක අපි කරපු වරදි මම එදත් කියනවා අදත් කියනවා ඒක මේ බොරු කියලා වැඩක් නැහැ මට නම් මේ සම්පූර්ණ දේශපාලන සංස්කෘතියම පිළිබඳව තියෙන මහ ලොකු අප්‍රසාදයක් කලකිරීමක් අපිටත් පුළුවන් වාඩි වෙලා සෝෂල් මීඩියා පෝස්ට් දදා පොරවල් වෙවි ඉන්න ඒකෙන් රටට වෙන දෙයක් නැහැ නමුත් මම කියන්නට ඕන පමා වෙලා හරි සියලු දෙනා එකතු වෙලා මේ රට ගොඩ දාන්න
Statements were recorded from several parliamentarians in connection with the assaults and acts of violence against peaceful protesters on the 9th of May. In the meantime, a 29-year-old suspect was arrested yesterday in connection with the assault and death of parliamentarian Amarakirti Arthukorala, who died on the 9th of May.
CCTV footage obtained during the assault on late MP Amarakirti Arthukorala on the 9th of May shows his vehicle being stopped by protesters in Nitambur and his personal security officer assaulted by a man wearing red clothes. The security officer was pulled out of the vehicle and beaten further by the attackers. The attackers were then seen assaulting MP Arthukorala after pulling him out of the vehicle as well. While the MP and his PSO were subjected to continuous beatings by the protesters, they however managed to escape to a nearby shopping mall. Using the elevator, the duo had gone to the top floor of the building. It was then reported that the attackers who followed the duo had beaten them both to death on the top floor of the shopping mall. Police today arrested a suspect involved in assaulting the MP and his PSO, the suspect wearing red in CCTV footage. The 29-year-old suspect, who is a bus driver, was arrested while he was hiding. Meanwhile, as a part of the CID investigations with regard to the brutal assaults that took place in Colombo on the 9th of May, parliamentarian Namal Rajapaksa arrived at the CID today to record his statement. Rajapaksa had left the CID after recording a 4-hour statement. Yesterday, statements were also recorded from MPs Indika Anuruddha, Pavitra Vanyarachi and her spouse Kanchana Jayaratna for nearly 5 hours. Meanwhile, a member of the Dehiwala Mount Lavinia Municipal Council and chairman of Hanwella Multipurpose Cooperative Society, who was arrested in relation to the May 9 assaults, were produced before the 4th magistrate today. The magistrate ordered the suspects to be remanded until the 25th of this month. The CID also informed the court today that investigations are underway on the police failing to stop the attackers from marching to Goldface. In the meantime, the Nugegoda Magistrates Court remanded a suspect arrested for setting fire to a bus during the Mirihana protests until the 27th of May.
The Committee on Public Enterprises has instructed Litro Gas Lanka Limited to distribute 60% of its LP gas cylinders on a daily basis to areas with dense population such as Colombo and Gampaha. Meanwhile, the country is also expected to welcome 2 more vessels tomorrow, with one carrying 37,000 metric tons of petrol and the other 28,000 metric tons of diesel. Meanwhile, Minister of Power and Energy Kanchana Wijayasekara said that the distribution of petrol 92 and 95 have begun and will continue to be distributed island-wide.
The acute shortage of fuel and gas Sri Lanka has been undergoing over the past few months has seen no improvement. The lines that extend from refilling stations have not changed, as most people spend their day in a queue trying to procure fuel. However, a shipment with 28,000 metric tons of fuel which arrived in the country yesterday is being unloaded. Meanwhile, 2 ships, one carrying 37,000 metric tons of petrol and the other carrying 28,000 metric tons of diesel, are scheduled to arrive in the island tomorrow. The diesel shipment is being provided to the country as part of the Indian line of credit. In the meantime, due to the lack of fuel, people blocked the Horana-Panadura road and protested in Slave Island, Galle and the Kalalgoda junction. Meanwhile, the Lanka Indian Oil Corporation announced today that it will no longer issue fuel to cans, containers or bottles with immediate effect. Indian Oil subsidiary in Sri Lanka noted that hereafter its filling stations will dispense petrol only to fuel tanks. In other developments, the Commission of Essential Services KDS Ruwan Chandra said that the officers on duty for the GC ordinary level examinations will be able to obtain fuel without any issues from the nearest refilling stations in their area on Sunday the 22nd of May from between 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. The country is also facing a severe shortage of domestic gas cylinders in addition to the shortage of fuel. Litrogas Lanka Limited said today that it has distributed 50,000 domestic gas cylinders island-wide today. The company added that if it is able to unload 3,900 metric tons of gas that is on board a ship that arrived yesterday, it would be able to release 80,000 cylinders of domestic gas to the market tomorrow. However, inclement weather conditions have made it nearly impossible for the ship anchored off the coast of Taldiavatta in Uswatikayawa to do so. In the meantime, the Committee on Public Enterprises has instructed Litrogas to distribute 60% of its LP gas cylinders to highly populated areas like Colombo and Gampaha and districts with limited alternative energy sources. Accordingly, it was decided that 60% of the gas cylinders distributed daily would be distributed to Colombo and Gampaha districts. It has also been revealed that the gas supply could be maintained in the next 3 months through the $120 million US credit line received from the Indian line of credit.
The Gathagama protest site marked its 42nd consecutive day of public agitation as protesters warned of the site being misused for personal benefit by some visitors to boost their profiles. The protesters have also pledged to resist all attempts by political parties and those with political agendas from claiming ownership of the struggle.
If anything has been made clear by the protests carried out at the Goldfish Green is that the protesters are willing to take their fight for as long as it is necessary to bring about a change in the system. As has been the case for the past 42 days, thousands continued to gather at the Gathagama protest site last night as well. A dansara was also organized last night. Just as it was in the past days, movies were screened last night at the outdoor cinema that has been christened the Tear Gas Cinema. Today, the protest site marked its 42nd day since it commenced on the 9th of April. During a media briefing today, some of the protesters at the Goldfish Green, however, are of the opinion that the protest site is being used by people to promote their personal images and agendas. To this, the protesters say that they will resist attempts by political parties and those with political agendas from claiming ownership of the struggle. In the meantime, the No-Deal Gama protest site in front of the temple trees continued its own agitation today as well. Officials of the Criminal Investigation Department meanwhile visited the site again today to interview protesters on the May 9th violence. Some of the protesters were taken to the CID headquarters for their statements on the chain of events to be recorded.
South Korea has issued a special travel advisory on Sri Lanka as the island remains crippled by civil unrest stemming from the economic crisis. The advisory called on South Korean citizens to cancel or delay non-essential trips to Sri Lanka or take extra caution if they're already in the country. And that's all for tonight. Good night.